Today I'm diving into the world of long exposure photography, and a big thanks to Nissi for sponsoring this week's video. Well, what a beautiful morning it is. Perfect for long exposure photography. Absolutely stunning. So if you're new to long exposure photography, let me briefly explain what it is. So it's a creative technique where the camera's shutter is left open for an extended period, allowing light to continuously reach the camera's sensor. And this method allows the camera to record motion blur if there's an object moving within your frame. The longer the shutter is left open, the more motion blur we will record. So to make taking long exposures easier, there are a few helpful items that we can use. And the first is a tripod such as this. Now, it is possible to shoot long exposures handheld if you've got image stabilization built into your camera or lens. I've had some success with 1 second exposures in the past with this setup here, but I would recommend using a tripod for the best results. Now, the second is ND filters such as these, and these stop a certain amount of light reaching the camera's sensor. Now I've got 3 different strengths of ND filters, a 3-stop, a 6-stop and a 10-stop. Now, if you don't own your own filters and you want to get started experimenting with long exposures, why not try going out at the end of the day? Now, as that light fades, you'll be able to take longer and longer exposures. So this is a great way of getting started and experimenting before you invest your hard-earned money. So let's go and see if we can make some long exposure photographs today. One of the most significant considerations for long exposure photography is camera shake. Now, wind can absolutely ruin your chances of creating a pin-sharp image. So if it's particularly windy, try finding a sheltered spot and secure your tripod to good solid ground. If possible, lower your tripod closer to the ground and shield it with your body or weigh it down with your camera bag. I'd also advise using either a shutter release cable or your camera's built-in timer to make sure you're not touching the camera during the exposure. So I've framed my shot up here and I'm going for a square crop here because I think it really suits the minimalist feel that I'm going for with this long exposure. I'm going to go for a very, very long exposure for this shot. I want to completely smooth out that water and make it look very ethereal, very minimalist looking shot. Now what we've got either side of this river here are 2 markers, and I think they make a great focal point for a long exposure image. Very simple, very graphic. What I'm trying to do is get down quite low because I want to make sure that the sea marker protrudes above the horizon, and I think that makes a more dynamic shot. Now, to the left-hand side, there's a few boulders that just creep into the frame, and I think they add a little bit of texture to the frame as well. So I think that's quite nice. Now, without any filters on at all, I've got 1/200th of a second, so quite a fast shutter speed. And I'll show you what that looks like now. So what I'm going to do is add a circular polarizer just to take some of the reflections off of the water and the rocks because the light's quite harsh now coming from the right hand side. And I'm also going to add a 10-stop and a 3-stop filter. So I'm going to stack 3 different filters together for this shot because I want to get about a minute long exposure. So I don't really want any detail at all in that water. And what I'm going to make sure I do before I put any of my filters on is make sure I've got my focus correct. So I'm just going to punch in on the back of the camera and just tweak my focus, making sure that I've got perfect focus on the details that I need sharp in the shot. And f11 as well helps me to keep my aperture fairly small, which again reduces the amount of light. And that's probably something else that's worth mentioning too, is you can reduce your aperture to reduce the amount of light coming in. But obviously, once we start stopping down the aperture too much, we tend to get the softer image due to lens diffraction. So typically, I don't normally go above f14. But for this shot, I'm at f11. That's giving me everything pretty decent, nice and sharp. So yeah, now I'm going to add my filters to the shot. So first of all, I'm going to put my circular polarizer on. Yeah, that looks nice. And then I'm going to add my 3-stop filter and my 10-stop filter. Now I'm having to stack so many filters just because of the amount of ambient light that we've got here. It's very, very bright right now. I was at 200th of a second before. What I can do now is dial back my exposure until I see my histogram looking right on the back of the screen. And yeah, we're getting 60 seconds, so that's great. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put my 2-second timer on and take this image now. What I'm going to do as well is just shield my lens as well from the sun, just to make sure there's no flare coming into the frame. So that's something else just to bear in mind as well. So before we search for another photo, please let me tell you about these brand new filters from Nissi. Now this is the Swift system, the FSND kit, which includes 3 different strength filters, a 3-stop, a 6-stop and a 10-stop ND filter. And these filters are great for creating long exposure photos, which is obviously what we're doing in today's video. Now the FS in the product title stands for full spectrum, meaning we get neutral colors that allow us to capture true to life images. Now the set that I've got here is the 82mm kit, which is bigger than all of my lenses. We then use the Swift adapter rings to make the filters fit on all of our lenses. Now the lens caps will fit to the adapter rings, meaning you can leave your adapter ring on your lens when it's in your bag and the filter is ready to be attached as and when required with absolutely no faff, which is great. Now these filters fit onto the adapter rings by friction, which is very unique. There is a small gasket inside the filter that allows the filter to push on and stay in place, and it remains secure even when you're carrying your camera around. You can also stack these filters and even add one of the Swift polarizers if required. Now the filters themselves have lens caps as well, so if you're in a very wet climate you can pop the lens cap on, or you're waiting for the perfect moment to take your shot. Now the filters are also color coded, which is super helpful as it allows you to quickly see which filter is which when they're in your bag. And if you'd like to learn more about these filters, please be sure to check out the link in the video description. And a big thanks to Nissi for sponsoring this week's video. Right, let's go see if we can get set up for another shot. I think it's important to note that a long exposure doesn't necessarily need to have a very slow shutter speed. I would suggest that any image showing a degree of motion blur equates to being a long exposure. The speed at which the object is moving will also determine the amount of motion blur shown at any given shutter speed. Here are some examples of photos I've taken in the past that show motion blur at different shutter speeds. So I've moved further down the beach now, right to the other end in fact, and we've got this boulder field here which is absolutely incredible, very, very interesting. Obviously lots of big boulders have fallen down off this cliff over the years and spread out down the beach, and it makes a very interesting foreground, I think. And at the minute the water's flowing through some of these boulders, what I'm going to do is use a very long shutter speed to smooth all of the water out, similar to what we did before, but this time it's just allowing the foreground not to be too texture heavy and also take the ripples off the water to show the blue sky as well. I've got the 10 stop and the 3 stop filter on, no polarizer this time. I think I want to show some reflection in the water, especially a bit further down there. So yeah, this particular cliff face is absolutely wonderful, especially while it's being lit with this beautiful low-lying sun. Got a lot of orange colours in and a seam of coal which runs right through it as well. And you might just be able to see a cave entrance there too, which is pretty awesome. Now, every now and again we get some fluffy white clouds coming through the scene, and because we've got a minute exposure, we're seeing some motion in those clouds as well, which is also nice. So I absolutely love long exposure photography. I think it's such a creative genre, isn't it? And it always makes me feel like I've created a piece of art as opposed to just a photograph. So I urge you to give it a try if you haven't already. One thing to watch out for though is overexposing your photos, which is why I highly recommend checking out the video that is up here. I'm sure you'll find that useful too. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more. I hope to see you all again next week.